Welcome to Cyber Shorts, a LinkedIn series brought to you by Secureworks, where we talk about short, snappy, and relevant cyber stories. Today, we have back with us Rafe Pilling, who's our Director of Threat Intelligence from our Counter Threat Unit, and myself, Stacy Leidwinger, VP of Marketing. Today, Rafe is here to discuss a recent arrest that happened with a 22-year-old British man that was found in Spain. He's alleged to be a member of the cybercriminal group known to Secureworks as Gold Harvest. Others sometimes refer to them as Scattered Spider. This criminal group is best known for their social engineering tactics. In fact, they were all over the headlines last year with the MGM cyber attack. Rafe, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Stacy. It's good to be here.
So, Rafe, maybe as we start out, could you talk a little bit about who Gold Harvest is? And as I mentioned, some do refer to them as Scattered Spider.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, another one of these many names for much the same thing. But so the group, as we track them, emerged at about mid-2022 and was initially targeting telecommunications, technology, and business process outsourcing companies. And they have specialized in circumventing authentication technologies and using insider access at mobile telecommunications operators in order to bypass multi-factor authentication, to steal data, and conduct fraud. So as you said, the group specializes in social engineering, and this is a sort of a catch-all term for manipulating people into doing something that the threat actor or the criminal wants. And they use a range of communication methods to do this, directly calling people, emails, SMS messages, all to try and manipulate either help desk staff or end users. Unlike many other criminal groups we track, Gold Harvest or Scattered Spider is more of a loose-knit collective of individuals. So a lot of the Russian-speaking groups we track are fairly well-defined operations and work with other affiliate groups, whereas Gold Harvest is sort of a subculture, a collection of individuals who share common interests and various sort of common communication channels and forums. They also have a set of shared tactics and service providers within the wider group, and much of the activity, rather than just being about enriching themselves, much of the activity is conducted for the purposes of bragging rights within the group. So being able to demonstrate how successful they've been, either through sort of high-profile media attention or by demonstrating they have significant cryptocurrency balances in wallets they've got. And also unusual is the fact that members of this group are often English speaking and based in locations like the UK, US, and Canada, which is different to a lot of the Russian speaking groups we track, which are not.
Yeah, Rafe, I guess one thing before we jump in too far, could you explain the two different names? I think we've talked both Gold Harvest, others talk Scattered Spider. Are they the same group? Can you give us a little bit of information there?
So there are a few other names as well. You've got things like Roasted Octopus, Scatter Swine, and I mean, really, when it comes down to it, when the sort of naming conventions that different companies use, is about their observation of that set of activity. So Scatter Spider is a name that's been adopted by a number of entities. The scissor advisories they put out on this group refer to Scattered Spider, for example, but we like to be able to track things according to our own naming terminology, and we have a well-defined set of names. Gold, for example, means a cybercrime group, and the second name there, Harvest, refers to the threat group itself. And as I said, in this case, it's somewhat less well-defined and amorphous than some of the other groups we track, but that's what it comes down to. We can only name what we see, and then if we see other vendors referring to what looks like the same activity by a different label, we will pull those things together. We've got threat group profiles published on the website, for example, that provide us sort of a Rosetta Stone so other people can see what the sort of naming equivalencies are. But yeah, they're roughly the same, but we couldn't say they were exactly the same.
No, I appreciate that. And I think we can put that link in. I think it'd be great for our audience. Rafe, kind of talking back to this group and their motivations, it's really fascinating that it is more of bragging rights, which I also think leads to maybe these high profile risk-taking tactics that are backed by social engineering. Could you talk a little bit about how you define social engineering and what are the different types of tactics underneath that these groups like Gold Harvest are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, unlike some of the Russian speaking groups we track, Gold Harvest focus less on setting up complex infrastructure, setting up or developing their own custom malware, and instead rely on a lot of the sort of communication channels that we all have available. So they will phone help desks, they will talk to people, they will try and manipulate them into resetting passwords for accounts they might have access to, or talking to try and talk information out of that help desk person. So things that they might need if they were going to phone back a few days later to try and authenticate themselves and impersonate somebody else. So all of this social engineering is often about impersonating an individual with more access or more privileges within the network in order to get to the data or other systems that they are interested in. And yeah, they will also do the same sort of thing from the other side. So target end users, try and manipulate them into clicking on a phishing link, following that link and entering data, which will be useful to the threat actor. Might just be username, password. Obviously, that's a given. But it could be other things like trying to get one-time password tokens that might have been sent to them through SMS or through some other multi-factor authentication platform that they use to try and trick them into giving up that information that that the user shouldn't normally give up.
It almost sounds like a real life video game being played out where you have people motivated for bragging rights to see what they can do and honestly trying to outsmart those that are trying to just do their job.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention video games actually, because a lot of this seems to come from a community that is, perhaps originally formed around playing video games of certain kinds, and over time they've branched out into other types of activities. A lot of that has originally focused on cryptocurrencies, but as we saw last year, at least some members of this group are also expanding their activities to ransomware and working with sort of Russian-speaking ransomware groups to conduct that activity.
And then going back to the arrest that was made, it's quite unusual where you see a headline of an individual arrest being made. Can you talk a little bit about what hit the news? I think it was June 14th that this came out.
Yeah, so it is relatively unusual because a lot of the time when we think of cybercrime, the individuals involved are usually in jurisdictions outside of Western law enforcement access. And so they can kind of operate with a degree of impunity, whereas these individuals are generally residing in, it appears, the UK or the US or perhaps Canada, places where law enforcement does take cybercrime very seriously and can go through an investigative process to track down these individuals and ultimately effect an arrest and a prosecution. And there have been a couple of other individuals in this wider community that have been arrested in 2022 and 2023, and this seems to be a continuation of that activity by law enforcement. And while obviously stealing cryptocurrency, stealing money, things like that is very serious, some of the other things these individuals can be involved in are things like swatting. So calling in a hoax emergency at a particular individual's home in an attempt to trigger a response from law enforcement, and sometimes those results can be lethal, and at the very least they waste law enforcement resources and put people's life in danger.
Yeah, it's scary to see how that's happening on the cyber front of everything. Now, talking about kind of the individual, just recently in our last cyber shorts, we talked about how law enforcement has really had a predominant presence this year, taking down some of these different cyber groups. This feels very different given it's kind of individuals coming up as this group. How do you see this kind of continuing in the trend, and what is this impact do you think going to be on groups like Gold Harvest?
So a lot of the activity we've seen from law enforcement is focused on technical disruptions. Recently, we had Operation Endgame focused on disrupting loader networks. Earlier this year, we had Operation Kronos focused on disrupting the Lockbit ransomware operation. And although these do have a lot of value, they result in intelligence being collected by law enforcement that can maybe feed into future prosecutions. They can identify maybe wider affiliates of these schemes that are in jurisdictions where law enforcement can effect an arrest and prosecution. Ultimately, the technical disruption can always be recovered from by threat actors. Now, There is another side to that where often, certainly in the case of ransomware operations, we've seen ransomware kind of being disrupted and then kind of bounce back a little bit and then ultimately just go away because the brand has been damaged within the criminal community and people don't want to work with them anymore. So there are long-lasting effects on that. But what is even better is when law enforcement can actually arrest the people behind the activity and put a stop to that activity altogether. And that's what we see here with this arrest, and that's what kind of makes it a bit different to some of the other cybercrime that has been looked at.
Hopefully at least prevents more from getting into this group of if they know that threat is very real. Fine. To kind of wrap up for today then, Rafe, what can organizations do to better protect themselves from these type of social engineering tactics?
So I do have some advice there. Something I kind of neglected to kind of go into a bit earlier that I'd like to kind of circle back to. So some of the ways that this group are operating, and again, I mentioned a bit, but we talked about social engineering. They focus on sort of three key tactics for social engineering. So the spear phishing, and initially they will do a lot of open source research. They are very good at making use of social media, things that people post on social media, making use of previous leaked sets of passwords and credentials to try and capture whatever they can about their targets. Or send their targets spear phishing emails in the hope that they will give up their credentials that way. They will also focus on calling help desk staff and maybe with some of the fragments they have already, start trying to make it so they can actually get onto the network. So talk that help desk operator or operators through the process of resetting passwords or migrating any tokens they might be having or maybe phone numbers associated with their account so they can start to get security messages that are associated with that user account rather than the real user and take over that account. And then lastly, the kind of targeting of end users. So doing things like sending a lot of multi-factor authentication requests in the hope that the end user will just accept one of them, and then with a valid username and password, that threat actor will be able to get into the account. And lastly, SIM swapping, and this is a fairly insidious attack, and this is something that this group, the wider group, tends to specialize in, which we don't see with so many other cybercrime groups that we look at. So SIM swapping, in effect, they are again social engineering, or maybe they have an insider at a telecoms company, and they are getting their a number that they control swapped in for a number. Well, they are getting a number that the telco has redirected to their device, a device that they control. So they're effectively hijacking somebody else's phone number, and in doing that, they can then intercept SMS tokens, one-time passwords, or even phone calls that are coming to that user's handset and masquerade as them. And using that sort of a technique, which there are multiple service providers within these underground communities that provide that, they can get around some forms of multi-factor authentication. So having said that, and circling back to what can people do about it, number one is making sure that employees understand some of these tactics that are potentially employed against help desk staff or employees themselves. For help desk staff, making sure that they're understanding some of the key signs of somebody attempting social engineering, things like invoking authority, invoking urgency, potentially long pauses in responses to questions that should be relatively easy to answer, difficulty in conducting certain tasks or feigning sort of unfamiliarity or a lack of sort of technical competency when it comes to whatever they've been asked. And help desk staff, and this is really important, that help desk staff feel empowered to terminate a call or come up with some other arrangement as to how they're going to validate that this is a real employee or a real user who should have access to whatever system or account they are trying to obtain access to. So often help desk staff can feel at the bottom of the stack. Somebody is senior, the help desk individual feels they will get in trouble if they don't help out, and people are naturally wanting to be helpful, and that's where sort of social engineering plays on that human instinct to help and try and circumvent a security control. So yeah, I think that's one of our key messages for this, is making sure help desk staff recognize the signs and feel empowered to do something about it. I guess the second thing is to not rely on mobile numbers in particular as any form of authentication. So if you have a multi-factor authentication system built on SMS messages, better to move away from that. If you're phoning somebody to try and prove that they are who they say they are, make sure you are doing that by asking them something they should know or having them perform a task that only that individual can do. Because as we talked about, it's possible to hijack phone numbers and have them redirected to other devices. And lastly, we want to make sure that if a network is compromised, there are technical controls in place that will detect that. So comprehensive network monitoring, looking for anomalous account access from anomalous locations or at anomalous times, and also looking to detect the installation of unauthorized software, remote access tools, that kind of thing, that there might be a follow-on activity of this group. So that was a lot to get across there. But I think, yeah, the thing that really distinguishes this group is that use of social engineering, is manipulating people and getting them to help the scammer, the criminal, bypass these security controls in one way or another. So making sure people are aware of those tactics and feel empowered to stop a call or to have a transaction verified in some other way if it looks suspicious.
No, thank you, Rafe. And I think it's very complex. I mean, that's the reality when you have these cyber criminals that are going after and trying to outsmart the individuals that are trying to be helpful, right? And that's why here at Secureworks, we often recommend kind of a two-prong approach. It's make sure that you have the awareness, but you're also testing your team. I think sometimes going through these adversarial testing, which Secureworks offers, really allows them to see where are potential weak spots and really bring to light the threat. And then as you pointed out, Rafe, I think having a strong cyber defense and response program, which is another thing Secureworks does with our platform, monitoring the network and other types of IT technologies and OT as well, to really help organizations detect and respond before harm can be done. If you're interested in learning more about that or the threat groups that Rafe spoke about, please visit secureworks.com. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you, Rafe.
Thank you.